And then it takes it. Okay. It says we're live, but it
Yay.
always has a little tiny lag
Delay.
before we
Yep.
get started. Okay, I'm guessing we've hit it past the lag. So here we go. Anyway, welcome everyone. Welcome, Monica, to Dabble's workshop on using brain science to overcome writers' resistance. And for everybody who is here with us, Monica and I were just mid conversation about how she stumbled into using neuroscience to help writers. Why don't you continue where we left off, Monica? How did you stumble?
This is such an interesting story. So this is a funny story I always tell people when they're like, how did you do this? So when I first started coaching, I wasn't necessarily brain science focused. And then I went to on a vacation in 2022, and I fell down the stairs during my vacation. And so I was super injured and I couldn't really do anything. And I was in Paris. And so I was just stuck in my hotel room reading books on my Kindle. And there was this book on, I think it's called Writing on the Right Side of the Brain. And I read that book and I was like, oh my God. And then I read another book that I'll be mentioning in my presentation, a book by Roseanne Bain, which is called Overcoming Writer's Block Using brain science, basically. And she goes into a lot of it as well. I also use this other neuroscientist. Her name is Nicole Vignola, which I'm going to mention her book as well in here. But she has a book called Rewire, which is fantastic about rewiring the brain. So that's just how I got into it, just reading about this stuff and being like, oh my God, what? There's a reason.
But you literally stumbled as the
actually, yeah.
into it. So
yes, I literally fell down the stairs and then
that slapstick element. I totally appreciate that. So I'm picturing it now. So welcome everybody. Instead of going through individually everyone who's here, I don't want to eat up all our time because I feel like you have information, Monica, that we all need. Hint, everyone, take out your pencils and your paper and your highlighters and get ready to take notes. There'll be a quiz at the end. Okay, so Monica did say that she is very good, you guys, at watching the chat as she presents. And so if you want to put your questions in the chat as you come up with them, if she can work it in, she's going to work it in. If not, I'm going to start it and we will come back to it at the end. So that is my only piece of housekeeping. I am going to drop off the screen. Let's put your screen up. Right. And without further ado, Monica, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Yes. So how long am I technically allowed to speak, by the way?
I think you are technically allowed to speak as long as you need because I am not going to stop you.
Okay, great. Sometimes this can go a little bit longer than an hour. That's why I ask. All right. So hello and welcome, everybody. So we're going to talk about using brain science to overcome resistance. Before I start, I want to just give a disclaimer that I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. I'm going to do my best to take my time with it and actually explain it. But if I'm going too fast, just let me know in the chat. Okay. All right. Are you guys ready? I always look at the chat to make sure people are feeling good. Okay. So there are many myths about resistance as a writer, but here are some of the most common ones that I hear. So resistance is just being lazy. I hear this so often when I'm running ads or something and people see my ads. Just some of the comments, it's just amazing. Real writers don't get resistance, they get to work. Resistance is just an excuse. So the truth is that all humans experience resistance, and it's not just with writing. This stuff I'm teaching you today is actually pretty applicable to everything in your life that you want to do that might be hard. If you want to be going to the gym consistently or whatever it might be. So this is just how we're wired. I'm going to explain to you why we're wired this way and what we can do about it. So first, this is me. I'm a writing coach, and I specialize in helping people overcome resistance. I have a master's in publishing, and I have an English lit degree from Berkeley. I call myself a recovering academic all the time. I've worked at 2 different literary agencies. I worked for WriteOnCon for a few years, and I have a professional background in social work. So people are always like, interesting, you were a social worker. I'm like, yes, I was a social worker. So I want to ask you, have you experienced any of the following in your writing life? And you can let me know in the chat. So struggles with procrastination. So you scroll on your phone or on your TV instead of writing, even though you know how important writing is to you and it's something that you really want to be doing with your life, right? Maybe you avoid writing even when you want to write and you're wondering why you just don't do it, okay? Feelings of overwhelm when you show up to the page. So this is often called blank page syndrome. Okay, I'm seeing some people saying, yeah, this is me. Perfectionism and a really mean inner voice that can make writing painful. I feel like this is a very common one. There's also more of these. So writer's block. So for example, you show up and your mind goes blank. Okay. Being daunted by the task in front of you. So you just can't get yourself to do it. It just feels like so much work and you just don't want to do it. Negative thoughts surrounding writing. So this could be imposter syndrome, thinking you aren't good enough, fear of failure or fear of success, self-doubt, believing your voice doesn't matter, right? Or feelings of shame or berating yourself for not writing. So if you have experienced any of these, you've experienced a level of resistance and you are very normal. I'm going to say you're very, very normal. So if I cough, just ignore it. I've had a weird cough for like weeks now. So what inspired this workshop? I mean, I technically stumbled into it, as I just explained. But remember, many years ago, I guess it was almost 10 years ago now, I told my then therapist that I was scared of my own creativity. And she was really confused about this. She was like, how can you be scared of your own creativity? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so at the time, I thought, oh, I guess I'm just broken. I guess I'm not meant to be a writer because she is saying like, how could you be scared of your creativity? Now I know why. I have fear about all these different things, right? Fear of failure, fear of success, all these different things come up in my brain. But I didn't think that that was normal, okay? But my brain was just working exactly how it's designed to work. And so that's what I'm going to teach you today. And I'm going to teach you ways that you can work with the brain, all right, to make writing a bit easier. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about write or flight. It's not you, it's your brain. We're going to talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So we're talking about our natural reactions to life. This is our nervous system. We'll talk about the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex and what they're doing. And we'll talk about tools to managing these responses, right? And training the brain and creating habits that actually work. All right. And also, I'm also a fellow ADHDer if anybody else is in that club. Okay. So these are some of my sources. So I just mentioned the Writer's Block book by Roseanne Bain. There's also the book, The Science of Stuck, which is really, really good by licensed clinical social worker Britt Frank. And then Rewire, which is by Nicole Vignola, who is a neuroscientist. Okay. I also have a link with a bunch of resources, and I have actually bonus PDFs for you guys. And I'll share that with you at the end, and you can grab that link if you want, and you can grab some of the resources in there. And I mentioned these books in there as well. Rewire is fantastic, Vanessa. I highly recommend it. Okay. When it comes to our brains, resistance is to be expected. Why is it to be expected? Staying stuck, so not writing, has a lot of body benefits. It actually has a lot of benefits for our brain and our bodies. So it prevents your discomfort. Your brain loves the comfort zone where things are safe. Okay. If you're in a comfort zone, that means that you're more likely to survive, right? It protects your emotions. So many of us experience overwhelm, anxiety, many different types of emotions when it comes to our writing. And our brains don't really want to experience those things on purpose. So let's not do that. Let's not go there, right? Image and reputation preservation. Maybe you've thought, what will my family think of my book? What will the internet say? Those kinds of thoughts, right? It also helps you avoid putting out unneeded effort. So your brain wants to save energy. And if you say, oh, I want to write for an hour, 5 hours, whatever that might look like, your brain's like, that sounds exhausting. Why would I do that? Like, what if we need to run from a tiger or do something else with our time and we actually need to conserve that energy? So it just says, nope, I don't want this. So what this means is that writing feels like a threat to the body and the brain. And this just means what I like to call write or flight. So resistance is let's write or let's flight. Let's not do this, okay? When you think about how the body is designed, they're designed to conserve energy. Most of us are aware of this now. Most of us are aware that our nervous systems are designed to conserve energy so that when the real threat happens, we can deal with it, right? Our nervous system has evolved to keep us safe. We're wired for survival. And this is a very important piece of information because a lot of us think like, well, yeah, but writing is safe. Like, why is this a problem? You're right. Your body, though, and your brain don't actually know that. And we'll explain why. Even if you don't feel like you need to conserve energy, your brain's mechanisms are automatic. There are people like Wim Hof who can like hack their nervous systems through like training and like swim in ice for 30 minutes. The average person cannot do that. Okay, the average Joe cannot do that. So we don't really have a lot of say in how our brains react to things, right? So when you show up to write, your brain thinks, this is unpredictable and I'm tired and this is going to take me a lot of energy, and also like what's going to happen if this ever gets published, and there's like all these fears coming in. This sounds dangerous. This sounds like a no. Like if we do this, I'm going to be putting myself in danger, right? So this is a really yes. 100% yes. It does make writing harder. When you look at the nervous system, we have two pieces of the nervous system that we are constantly toggling between, okay? So we have, there we go. We toggle between our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. So when you think about these, people often get them like, they're like, I can't remember which one's which. The sympathetic nervous system is when you're, having a stress response, for lack of a better word. That's what they call it usually, like a stress response or a survival response. So when you're running from a cheetah, okay? And your sympathetic nervous system keeps you safe, keeps you able to deal with it, like gets adrenaline pumping, all those different things. Your parasympathetic nervous system helps you calm down after that response, all right? I always remember them by saying, please sleep. Like the parasympathetic nervous system wants you to like relax and calm down, like please sleep, okay? So your sympathetic nervous system just wants to detect threats and keep you alive. And it gives you short-term energy. Yay! That's why we exist as a species. Woo! The PSNS is meant to help you calm down after a stress response. So sometimes people get stuck in one of these places. If you are stuck in the sympathetic nervous system, you might have high anxiety, high stress. If you're stuck in PSNS, you might be depressed, right? The amygdala, which is kind of the base of our fight or flight response, part of the limbic system, which we're going to be talking about a lot today, our amygdala, doesn't care about your writing goals. She is in there just trying to make sure that you survive. Okay, your amygdala, she's an interesting girly, okay? She's designed to prioritize immediate survival over any rational thinking. All right. let's talk a little bit about our little amygdala, who is hanging out basically around here. Okay. She's primitive and she's always scanning for threats for us. Yay. She's also often called the emotional brain. There's a few different pieces in this part of the brain. There's also the hippocampus and things like that. And she sends memories. Okay. But the amygdala is often what we think of as the emotional brain. I don't love this term because technically, like, emotions aren't bad, but we often label them as bad in our society. But think of it as this, we're not thinking logically, right? Like, you might sit down and try to write and your brain starts reacting. It's like, well, there's not a cheetah in this room. Like, I'm safe. But your emotional brain doesn't see that logic. Okay. We are supposed to have the stress response. This is an important thing to being alive. Sometimes I wish I could have an amygdala lobotomy, though, because she's dramatic. But people often ask me, like, well, why does writing feel like a threat? Like, obviously, a real threat like a bear or, you know, like a car running at me at high speed, like those are real threats. So why would writing feel like that? And why would it be causing this kind of stress response? There's a lot of reasons. It could be a trigger. So, trauma from a past experience with writing. It's also conditioning, causing it to feel safe. So our perfectionism, our self-doubt, our fears, all these things are playing a role in what's going on in the brain. So for example, if you're afraid of what people are going to think about of your book when it's published, your amygdala is like, okay, well, this means that we are afraid of this thing. We want to avoid that. So let's walk away from this. Your guys' comments are funny. But also, your amygdala is just very dramatic. Okay. We might think, and this is a really annoying part about having a human brain. People will often talk about I want to heal from these things. I want to overcome this. And I'm like, yes, but you can't stop your amygdala from existing. It just is what it is. And unless your amygdala wasn't in your body, you're going to have these responses to things. Can we work with it? Yes. But you are a human with human parts. Okay. And your amygdala is just dramatic. So this is a little visual I like to add. You trying to write and your amygdala is just being like, I'm not having this. Okay. I'm sensing danger. This is not the vibe. I don't want to do this. Let's talk a little bit about what fight, flight, freeze, and fawn might look like. So fight can be an example of your inner critic, right? It can be an example of, you getting angry at the writing world. There's a lot of different reasons for it, right? Flight can be distraction. This is, I feel like, the most common one I see is people running away from their writing or not showing up at all. Okay. Freeze can often be writer's block. So if you show up and you're trying to write and your brain just turns off, that is a freeze response. Fawn can be writing for others and not for yourself, or not writing to please others. So maybe you have a parent that thought that you shouldn't be a writer, for example. Okay. So you might be thinking, there's no real danger with any of these things, but your amygdala is emotional. It's not logical. All right. And all of these different fears can feel very real to us. So for example, it could be I'm afraid that I will not sell any copies of my book. That might seem like, oh, yeah, that's a very, realistic thing to be fearful of, but your amygdala might interpret that as this is failure and we don't want to approach failure. We don't want to put ourselves in a place where we're going to look stupid or foolish in front of others, or we're going to feel pain. Your amygdala wants to go toward pain and away from pain, go toward pleasure, away from pain, toward pleasure. Pleasure is its number one goal so that it can keep us safe. All right. So when you think about these responses, it's survival mechanisms. Okay. They prepare our bodies for action or to deal with a threat or flee a threat. Right. But our ancestors, face these threats. But in the modern world, most of us aren't facing threats like this. So we're not facing a cheetah in the wilderness. You know, we're not seeing a bear daily. We're not running around the wilderness constantly and like afraid for our lives. But our brain doesn't really know the difference. Okay, it hasn't learned how to deal with the modern world. Okay. So your brain just wants to avoid discomfort, aka writing. Writing is very uncomfortable for many of us. We're facing very vulnerable things in our writing, right? So your prefrontal cortex is hanging out, and she is what we often call the most new part of the brain. And she's where you create motivation and goals and stuff, right? And we love her. She's the reason we're human. I haven't been inside an animal's brain, but they don't have that kind of logic, okay, that we do. At least I don't think they do. I mean, I haven't been inside a cat's brain, so I have no idea. Maybe I'm wrong. Your amygdala is your little primal brain. These people often call this the primal brain, so amygdala, and the conscious brain, prefrontal cortex. I've often heard it called that. I've often also heard it called like the reptilian brain, if you think about the amygdala. Okay. So my favorite way to explain your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala is that your amygdala is a 4-year-old or 3-year-old with a knife in its hand and like trying to respond to threats with a knife. And it's just like, I will fight the threat. Like, help me fight this threat. Like, I'm gonna keep you safe. And your prefrontal cortex is just like, oh my God, I cannot with you. You are just like so dramatic and freak out at the smallest thing. Like, it's fine. It's fine. Sometimes I tell people that they can use a reparenting voice for their amygdala. We can reparent ourselves to make it so that we can talk ourselves into doing hard things. Okay. So your amygdala is also going to remind you of all your fears and your trauma to stop you from facing discomfort. That's her job. All right. So for example, had a traumatic experience with an old critique group. Writing is not safe. It makes us feel shitty. Right? I don't want to feel that way. Okay. It reminds us of all those mean things they said about our book. Are you scared of rejection? Oh, writing is not safe in that case. Your brain's like, we're going to get rejected by how many publishers? No, I don't want to do that. Nope. Do you feel inadequate? Maybe you show up to write and you don't feel like it's good enough, right? Maybe you show up to write and you think like, oh, I'm scared of, one person said, finishing my book, right? I'm scared of finishing. Maybe I'm scared of what people are going to say about it. I'm scared of publishing. There's a million fears, right? That means the brain notices it and says writing isn't safe. It's pushing all these fears up to the surface, right? Worry that your writing sucks? Stop. I don't want to face this. This is painful, right? Scared of not doing your story justice? I hear this one all the time. Your brain's like, you don't feel like you're doing this justice and that you suck and that nothing you write is worth anything. This is really painful and I want us to stop. Okay. Your amygdala has got your back, keeping you safe. It's really funny. Actually, one of my clients, her sister has a seizure disorder. I had one as a child. And actually her safety response was affected. And she doesn't have any problems writing books. She's a writer and has like no issues with writing. She finds it super fun and she doesn't get a lot of fear. And I'm like, so what we need to do is just remove our amygdalas from our body. It's great. Okay. Sometimes it can take my amygdala like 15 minutes or so to calm down when I write. Sometimes it takes less. Sometimes it takes more. Okay. And it's throwing all sorts of things at me, right? It's throwing like, this writing isn't good enough. What happens if you publish it and nothing happens? What happens when you get, published? And there's throwing all the fears at me. And so my brain is activated. Okay. And then I'm like, oh, I don't feel so good. I don't want to do this. This is painful. And so your brain wants you to go toward pleasure. That's why you go scroll on your phone. That's why you go watch TV. Sometimes I feel like my skill is not caught up to my vision. Nobody feels that their skill is caught up to their vision. I can guarantee you. Almost everyone I know feels like they suck. As a writer, I feel like we have to learn to embrace the suck. As artists, we have to learn to embrace the suck. Because as we evolve as artists and grow, we might look at our past stuff and be like, oh, this sucks. That's because we grow and we evolve, right? There are exercises to calm it down. I'm going to teach you those, yes. So we have ancient brains in a modern world. And people are like, well, how long is it going to take for our amygdala to like chill out? And I'm like, thousands of years. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like it's going to take hundreds and thousands of years. Okay. So recognizing these responses can help us understand them. All right. And manage these responses. So this is just an example. I'm going to sit down to write and you're going to yell at me. And I'm going to sit with this discomfort. Learning to sit with discomfort is a very important part of this process. Okay. The great news is that we have neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is my BFF. I love her. We love her. So when you think about overcoming resistance and making writing easier, your amygdala will always be keeping you safe. That's unless you remove it, which you shouldn't do that because you would die. But your amygdala will always be keeping you safe. But we can teach the amygdala that writing is safe. Okay. And I do this from practice and training. All right. And this means practice means like exactly what it sounds like, showing up to write. And training means understanding that our brain is a muscle, just like our regular muscles. And I like to give a gym metaphor here. So most of you probably wouldn't go to the gym and start repping 50 pounds if you haven't been to the gym ever in your life, right? You would probably be like, yeah, you start small and you build up. Like that's what you do. But most of us don't realize that this actually translates to the brain as well. So for example, when people, are like, I'm going to do NaNoWriMo and I'm going to write 50,000 words in a month. What sometimes happens is that they burn themselves out after 2 weeks and they're like, I don't ever want to write again. That was terrible. And there's a reason for that. It's basically like going to the gym and repping 50 pounds immediately without doing any training. Okay. Your brain needs training. Okay. We also have competitive plasticity, meaning that if you don't write for a while, your neurons are going to go to do other things. Okay. So if you stop writing for 6 months, RIP Nano. We have myelin in our neural pathways. And that means when we do something often, myelin hangs out by creating more connections in the brain, making writing easier. So this can make it so if we don't write for a long time, it feels like we're starting over again. Okay, that's basically why. And so when you think about, oh, I want to, take a break on my project, you can obviously take a break. But then when you show up, you'll be like, oh, where was I? What was I doing? It's because those neurons went to something else. Okay. So I like to say that building writing neurons will help you write more consistently and will help your amygdala freak out less. Okay. This is a common phrase in the neuroplasticity kind of world. Neurons that fire together wire together. All right. But neurons that fire apart wire apart. All right. And so in order to start writing more consistently and for your amygdala to not be freaking out so often, you have to build writing neurons. All right. Our neurons can be a little fickle. So when you stop going to the gym, for example, it's well known that after 3 weeks to a month-ish, you start to lose some of that muscle and you'll have to get it back. It's the same thing with your neurons with writing. If you don't show up for a month, those neurons will start hanging out somewhere else. Okay. That's just how the brain works. However, you can build those neurons, but those neurons take some time to build. It can take 2-3 weeks. It can take 2 months for some people. Okay. But a lot of people never create the patience to actually build them. Building neurons means like you're not showing up to try to write for an hour a day. You do tiny habits so you can build them, right? Just like you wouldn't go to the gym and rep 50 pounds immediately, you would start at 5 pounds, right? Neurons will make it so that showing up is a bit easier. So shortened or less frequent amygdala freakouts. So the limbic system will calm down because you're showing your brain that writing is safe. Okay. When you think about the brain, our motivation brain, so our prefrontal cortex, needs to drive the bus. She needs to be in charge. Okay. Excuse me, this cough is so annoying. So let me give you a bit of an example. So when you think about, let's say you show up to write and you go into a freeze response. Maybe, you freeze and you have writer's block. This is caused by aphasia, so the loss of a language center. And this is a common response when you show up and you try to write and you can't get words to come to your brain. Okay. This can cause confusion, feeling like, oh, I just had that word and I don't remember what it is. Like, why can't I think of anything? And then we maybe feel uncomfortable for whatever reason. We might think like, oh, I'm such a bad writer. I can't think of anything. So then the writer's block occurs. And what we have to do is learn to wait for our amygdala to calm down. Okay. We have to sit with that discomfort. And this is the hardest part of writing and building writing neurons. Like, this is number one, the hardest part of sitting down and being like, okay, I'm in freeze and my brain is throwing all these thoughts at me of like, I'm a failure, whatever it might look like. And I have to sit with this discomfort in order to build these neurons. This is the hardest part. But our goals never existed in our comfort zone, you guys. Like, it's called the comfort zone for a reason, because we don't grow there, right? So we can also recruit our cortex, our prefrontal cortex, to help us take a little bit of power back from our amygdala, okay? I like to call this elbow grease, using a little bit of elbow grease. Like when you're washing dishes and you're like, oh man, like I cannot get this dish to clean and you have to do a little bit of elbow grease. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So let me talk about our responses. So flight, fight, freeze, and fawn, and how our bodies respond to trauma. Okay. Trauma is wildly misinterpreted in our society. And this is how Britt Frank, the author of one of the books I mentioned, The Science of Stuck, this is how she explains trauma. Trauma is anything that's too much, too fast. All right. And so she describes it as an internal state in which your brain is unable to digest or process information. Okay. So there's trauma, like I often hear this called little t trauma or big T trauma. Big T trauma would be something that everybody knows is traumatic. So like, war, abuse, natural disasters, things like that. And then we have a trauma-inducing event. So little t trauma, this is often called. These actually can cause distressing symptoms, but they're actually can be quite positive. Getting married, moving to a new city, getting, starting a new job, whatever it might be. But what's happening here is that your brain perceives an energy need. So it shuts down because it perceives an energy need. And that might be like, oh, I'm moving to a new city. Everything's different. I feel exhausted. Your brain's like, oh my God, I cannot handle this. This is so much. Okay. And so it creates a trauma response around that. All right. So let's talk about what these can look like for writing. Being stuck in flight. So seeking safety by escape. Avoidance. So procrastinating, right? Or just leaving an uncomfortable situation. Okay. Quick to walk away. High levels of perfectionism and anxiety. happen a lot here. Daydreaming can also happen here. Your brain is trying to create an escape mechanism. Procrastinating or delaying tasks due to failure or fear of failure, fear of success, lots of fear, whatever it might be. Using substances happens here as well. A lot of people use substances in different parts of life to avoid difficult things. Overthinking can be a flight response. This is another common one. Frequently changing your manuscripts to avoid challenges in the manuscript. So like if you constantly are like shifting back and forth between different manuscripts or projects. Okay. Being stuck in a fawn response can look like trying to appease others. Okay. So overly accommodating behavior, putting other people before your writing. If you're a people pleaser, this is what that looks like. Seeking validation or approval constantly. So let's say that you write and then you immediately need someone to validate it in order to feel like it's valued. Okay. Taking on excessive responsibilities, suppressing personal feelings or needs to avoid conflict, right? Avoiding confrontation, not setting boundaries. These all can affect our writing. Okay. I also switch between stories, NJ. As an ADHDer, I let myself. It's just when it becomes chronic and you never finish anything, it becomes a problem. And then we have being stuck in fight response. This is, I guess, a little bit less common, but it still happens. So intense feelings of anger or aggression toward your manuscript. Okay. Verbally aggressive behaviors like shouting, arguing. Impulsive reactions without consequences being thought of. Being overly critical or judgmental to yourself or others happens here. Acting defensively. Experiencing frequent irritability or short temper, right? And then freeze. Okay. Feeling paralyzed. You show up to write and you just feel paralyzed, right? Sense of fear or dread can happen here. Avoiding making decisions. So maybe you have indecisiveness towards a decision you need to make in your manuscript. Dissociation happens here, detaching from reality. Feeling disconnected from your body also happens in freeze. Feeling trapped. Overwhelm happens in freeze a lot. Okay. Overwhelm at like maybe how much work you have to do on the manuscript, how you're going to do it, all these different things, right? Maybe you're having difficulty focusing. That can also be a freeze response. Zoning out or losing track of time can also be a freeze response. Okay. Feeling trapped can mean a lot of different things. But for example, like maybe you're writing a book that you don't want to be writing, but you're doing it for money, for example, right? So the truth about this trauma, okay? So if you scroll TikTok for 5 hours, it's not because you're lazy or you're a failure. Your brain thinks it needs to conserve energy. That's what's happening, okay? Our motivation is voluntary. Our cortex, our prefrontal cortex, is the one that's creating our goals and our dreams, okay? Our amygdala does not create it, okay? Our body's responses are involuntary. So have you ever sweat through your shirt in an interview, for example? Even though you know there's not really a threat, like it's not like they're gonna pull out a knife and like kill you, right? But our body's responses do that, okay? So resistance is basically a trauma response, aka amygdala takeover, all right? So thoughts like I'm lazy or I'm unmotivated, I guess I'm not meant to be a writer, they're completely inaccurate. So you can let go of that shame, okay? It's completely inaccurate, all right? Writing is too much for your brain too quickly because it's seen as a threat, out of your comfort zone, scary. It's unknown and it's unfamiliar. It feels really scary because it doesn't know what to expect. And your brain hates that uncertainty. It hates it. Okay. We have a familiarity bias because of the fact that the familiar is where we survive. Okay. The amygdala and the prefrontal cortex don't get along. So there's a thing called an amygdala hijack, where it hijacks your prefrontal cortex. Okay. These are very annoying, but they happen. They are constantly in conflict because your amygdala is trying to keep you safe and your prefrontal cortex is like, you're doing too much, boo. Like, you're doing too much. Okay. So your brain is designed to get out of a stressful situation, not to make sense of it. So we might be thinking like, well, why is writing so stressful? There's a lot of reasons. It could be fear of failure, fear of success, fear of the unknown, all of it. And your brain is not designed to get information about it and understand it. It's designed to help you survive and get out of it. All right. When you run from your writing, your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do and protecting you from discomfort. Let me drink some water. How are you guys feeling? You can tell me in the chat. Okay. Perfect. I'm glad to hear that, Kim. So this is unfamiliar and this is taking work. I don't want to do this. This is your brain. And it's just like, no, I don't want to. Like, I don't want to do this. So what does this mean? Like, how do we manage our writing knowing all this information? Okay. I think I have a tiny amygdala, but it's fierce. Good idea. All right. This means that we can reparent ourselves and our amygdala. Okay. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. Training our brains using tiny habits and repeating those. And I say tiny habits because I mean tiny, which we'll also talk about in a minute. Naming your emotions. And this is an important part that a lot of people don't know about. Naming your emotions, witnessing your thoughts, and changing your thoughts. And we're going to do an exercise about this. Okay. Discomfort. I know it sucks, but you have to face discomfort in order to build those neurons and to show your brain that writing is safe. Okay. Awareness of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex helps us activate our prefrontal cortex. All right. Let's talk about our thoughts and why they matter. Okay. So as humans, we have what's called metacognition. And this just means that we have the ability to examine and think about our own thoughts, which is super fucking cool. Oh, sorry. I was trying not to cuss. I'm sorry. I cuss a lot in my own work and I try not to do it in group settings. I will not do that again. So we can redirect our thoughts as humans, which is really powerful. It's really, really powerful. All right. The way that we speak to ourselves matters. Okay. And you might be like, whatever, like, I don't care. I will explain to you why it matters. Okay. When you think about your emotions and how you talk to yourself, our thoughts can often create our emotions. Okay. This is a little emotion wheel from this doctor he created in 1980. There are much bigger ones that can go way more into depth than just this one. This one's a little bit more like clean. And basically, when we think about and name our emotions, it recruits our prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for our logic, right? And basically, this means that naming your emotion pulls our prefrontal cortex, or our motivation brain, into the driver's seat. It makes it so that she's the one driving the bus, which is what we want, right? We want her in the driver's seat and not our amygdala. Okay. This also helps us detach from the narratives that we repeat in our heads. So this information, by the way, is directly from Rewire, that book I mentioned by Nicole Vignola. And basically, when we reactivate the prefrontal cortex, we're giving more control to the rational brain, which will help us with our writing. Okay, we're giving our prefrontal cortex a place to take control of what's going on in the brain so that our amygdala isn't hijacking us. All right. Something that can be helpful when you show up and your brain wants to throw a tantrum and wants you to walk away, or you just don't show up and your brain is throwing a tantrum thinking about writing, is asking yourself what you're running from. Okay, this is where I like to start when it comes to thought work. What am I running from? You can ask yourself, like, what am I afraid of? What is it that I'm avoiding right now? Okay. And you can just notice what your brain tells you here. We're not judging what our brain tells us. We're just noticing. We're just observing. Okay. So here's some examples. I'm running from feeling stuck. I'm running from feeling like my writing isn't good enough. I'm running from fear that I won't make it as a writer. I'm running from feeling like I'm inadequate. There's a million different reasons. Okay. So anybody in the chat want to share what they are running from when they are running from their writing, what they think that they're running from? You can give us a thought for a second as I drink some water. Run from love scenes. Ooh. Yeah. Running from failure and being successful. Fear of the unknown, Kim. Fear of the unknown. I don't run it more like a hobble. I'm running from not being as good as others in my family. Yep. Not being good enough. Yep. Complex situations. I feel like I get hung up on emotion. I'm a bit of a spectrum and struggle to express it in person. That reflects in my writing. Yep. Running from feeling like my writing isn't good enough. Yes. Yep. Okay. I'm in the editing phase and it's difficult to try to write a proposal in a way that I think will get me accepted. So I'm running away from having to get rejected. Yep. Running away from judgment. Yep. Okay. We're going to do an exercise. Witnessing and changing our thoughts. So let me give you an example. As a child, let me check the time. Oh boy, we're going to be going for a minute. As a child, I was not a gifted kid. I was like very much the opposite of a gifted kid. I was undiagnosed ADHD and I really struggled in school, honestly. And so the only thing I was really good at was writing. Like that was really the only thing I had. And that was the only thing that I felt like I had value in. And so now, as a 33-year-old, my brain tells me that I have failed at the only thing I've ever been good at. It says like, oh, you were good at as a writer when you were a kid and you failed at that. You haven't done it yet. You don't do it justice. You're not good enough. Okay. So this is my painful initial thought. You should be better at writing by now. You shouldn't have had to put in a lot of hard work to be a writer. You haven't succeeded at the only thing that you're good at. This is the initial painful thought that I might have for, oh, I shouldn't have had to work so hard. I was good at it as a kid. What happened to me? I suck. Right? New thought. I can create a new thought because we have metacognition, right? And I can say, by showing up to write and work on my craft, I am fulfilling that calling. Okay? Or practicing writing is making me a better writer. It means I'm not a failure. You can choose whatever thought feels good to you. All right? But we're looking at a painful thought and we're going to choose a new thought. Okay? So I want you to think of a thought you'd like to change. Here are some recommendations when you're choosing new thoughts. So choose something that feels real. Otherwise, your brain won't trust you. So like, if your initial thought is like, I'm never going to sell any books, I don't recommend having a thought of, I'm going to sell 1 million books, because your brain's just going to be like, yeah, you're not going to do that. So instead, you could say something totally different. You could say, I'm going to do my best in my craft. That's all I can control, for example. Okay. Sometimes thinking of this as a reparenting voice can be helpful. So if you think, some people like to call this a mothering voice, a fathering voice, whatever feels supportive for you. Okay. I also want to say, this is important, you cannot choose a new thought without validating your pain. Right? This is a really important part of like CBT when you go to therapy, so cognitive behavioral therapy. You're supposed to validate the current feeling and the current thoughts, and then choose a new thought. You cannot validate a thought without, you cannot choose a new thought and new thought patterns without validating what you're already going through. Okay. So, some question to ask yourself to find a thought you'd like to work with. Some of you already have a few thoughts in the chat, which is awesome. So you could ask yourself, what brings me shame in my writing life? What do I fear? What are some thoughts that your inner critic throws at you? Right? So think of a thought, like a painful initial thought that you'd like to rework and change. Okay, thinking my writing isn't good enough or that people will read my books. Tatiana's thought. So, Tatiana, what would you rather believe? Just curious. What would you rather believe apart instead of thinking my writing isn't good enough? Maybe it's, as I practice, I become a better writer. Maybe it's, when I show up, I'm doing my job, becoming a better writer. Right? So put them in the chat. I know this can be a very vulnerable exercise, and sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to post my initial painful thought. But if you're brave, I'd love to see a thought, this maybe a painful initial thought that you'd like to rework. I was the opposite. I was good at everything, so I feel like I failed because I picked writing instead of something practical. I hear that a lot. People are like, oh yeah, I chose the practical thing that would make me money. Yep. I wonder if, let's see. My biggest fear, I won't finish my books, mainly due to health issues. Maybe it's not I won't finish my books, it's that I'm doing my best, and that's enough. Right? There's more story in my head than on page, and I'm afraid I will lose the essence of my characters as my fingers try to catch up. It could be I can make this book and these characters shine through practice and revision and working on it. There's nothing telling me I can't. Right? I started too late and the subject is not current. Ooh, I've been told that I can do it and it's never too late is your new thought. I love that. I love that. I often hear that, like, I started too late feeling, right? And I like to remind you that if you're alive, you didn't start too late. If you're dead, it's too late. Okay? If you're dead, then it's too late. Right? I see that as quite young. My mom is that age and makes art. I always start off well, but can never make progress with the book. But I can never seem to stick with it. Your new thought could be, I continue to keep showing up even when I fall off the wagon. Right? I continue to come back every time I fall off the wagon. I'm afraid I will stay stuck where I am forever because I'm too afraid to make the leap and do the hard, scary things. So another thought to this could be, I'm capable of doing hard and scary things. You've probably done hard and scary things in your past, right? You're alive. Being alive is hard and scary, right? I fear that people are only saying good things about my writing out of pity. Okay, that's just incorrect. That's your amygdala lying to you. Okay. Yeah. I'm afraid to lose myself in my story when things get intense. Yeah. That can be some of the self-care that we can use with those kinds of situations, you know? Because writing is very vulnerable. We're facing a lot of very vulnerable, difficult things on the page. And there are ways that we can make it feel safer. Okay. We wake up every day to face the horror, but we endure. Yes, exactly. All right. I fear I'll never be as good as my mom or dad and was and forever be in their shadows. Let me ask, do you feel like, you know, in 20 years, you will be looking back and thinking, oh man, even though I wrote those books, I never was good enough? Or do you think like or are you thinking, I'm just glad that I tried and that I made an effort to write those books or whatever it might be that you're writing? Even if maybe I didn't live up to some version in my head. Our brain also creates stories, right? Like we have the story of, I'll never be good enough as my mom or dad, and I'll live in their shadows, right? Like the story of they are better than me. And that's just a story that we're repeating in our heads and it's probably not a fact, right? And so when it comes to looking at these thoughts and being like, oh, I don't think that's an accurate thought. Our thoughts aren't facts. Our thoughts and our fears are not facts, right? So we already did this. You might be wondering, like, why does this matter? Why do our thoughts actually matter here? And there's a few reasons, okay? Your thoughts are creating your conditions when you show up. So imagine that you show up to write and you have this thought of like, you know, I suck. This book sucks. I can't do this. I will never be good enough. Like you have maybe this like all these different thoughts floating in your head. So if you have these painful thoughts when you show up, it's going to cause your amygdala to react, right? Because our amygdala wants to avoid pain and go towards pleasure. Okay. It's like, this hurts. This is painful. I'm going to leave. I'm going to stop. Right? So your thoughts will drive your primal brain to act and protect you. That's its job, is to protect you. And so when you think about your thoughts, these are recommendations for you. Write the thought that you want to remember somewhere that you can see it and you can remind yourself of it. Okay? Like a sticky note on your desk, something like that. These things might seem embarrassing, but they matter. Right? Creating and believing new thoughts can take time. Okay? The power of this exercise is noticing and observing the automatic stuff going on in our heads, the I'm not good enough, I can't, blah, 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 and interrupting it and stopping it. Okay? Because when you show up and you have painful thoughts, your brain wants to take away the pain by walking away. That causes resistance. Okay? I also want you to be aware of the negativity bias and the confirmation bias, which I actually saw happening in the chat. So like, you know, the I will never make it, right? If you've been experiencing resistance for a while, you might have this bias about resistance, okay? Repeated habits become automatic. This is because our neurons are firing consistently in a certain place for many, many years, right? Imagine that for 10 years, you make coffee the exact same way, and then suddenly you get a new coffee machine and it works a bit differently. Imagine at, 6 a.m. when you're making your coffee and you're on this new machine, you're going to be like, whoa, I forgot this is totally different than the last 10 years you're behaving in a way that your brain has expected for 10 years and you're shifting something. And so you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. What do I do? Right? When you change your behavior with writing, you are creating new neurons. And this is really hard work. I often hear from people who are overcoming resistance that they're exhausted because it's just hard work. Your brain's creating new pathways and it's really hard work. It's just like going to the gym and trying to gain muscle. It's hard work. Okay. Your brain might say, I knew I couldn't do it. And that's when you notice that that's an incorrect thought. Okay. So I ask you to keep with it. Remember that our brain has stored templates of previous experiences and memories and scenarios. This is another direct quote from Rewire. It's energy efficient to do this, right? It makes it so that your brain can remember all sorts of different things so that it can keep you surviving and not having to remember everything all the time, right? Your brain would be exhausted if it was having to remember every single new experience as a new experience. That's why it has information and memory. Okay. So this causes our confirmation bias. So it's our tendency to interpret and search and recall information to confirm our prior beliefs and values. So I saw one of that in the chat of like, oh, well, every time I get back to it, I fall back on the same old patterns. And so it's never going to happen. Like I'll never make it. And you know what happens when you fall back on the other patterns? You just get back on the wagon. We all human, right? We all have things going on in our lives. And when we stop writing, that's okay. We just get back on the wagon, right? When you start a new habit, your brain will try to find reasons that it won't work, okay? Negativity is stored memories. We have negativity in our stored memories because it helps us survive threats, all right? Our brain works this way so that we can stay safe, okay? Knowing this, you can stick with it better. All right. But sometimes you just have to use elbow grease, and that means showing up and sitting with discomfort. All right. Let's talk a bit about training the brain. Athletes need training, and so do our brains. Okay. Tiny goals equals mighty results. So when people are overcoming resistance, I often hear people want to do these crazy things. And I'm like, no, tiny means like show up for 1 minute. Or 30 seconds, like literally the tiniest amount. Okay. Also, it can help to track your process and your progress because this helps you witness your thoughts and patterns over time. So a lot of us are working on computers nowadays, right? Like a lot of us aren't writing in a journal. And so sometimes our brains don't see feedback or proof of work because it's all digital. And your brain doesn't really like that. It wants to see proof of all the work it's done. And so having some kind of like, journal where you track how things are going can be really helpful for the brain because it's like, oh yeah, I have done work. I've done things. So creating a show up goal and don't go over that. And I mean, don't go over it because I mean like tiny habit. Okay. An all or nothing thinking will kill your writing life. I hear this all the time. A lot of writers are like, I need to have hours and hours to write. Like I need to be writing way longer than I am. Like if I want to be a real writer, right? We have a tendency to go big and go home as writers. We're like, we want these like sexy long word counts and hours of focus. And your amygdala will always go home. Okay. Like your amygdala's favorite place is home where it's comfortable and safe and they can eat snacks. Your amygdala will always go home. So let's work with her and just do 30 seconds or 1 minute to build the habit. Okay. So go tiny. And this means that you could say, I'm going to show up for a minute for 2 weeks and then I'll up it after that. It could be that your bare minimum is showing up for 30 seconds or a minute. And then you try to stay there for 10 minutes and then you up it after a few weeks. But remember that your neurons are still building. Okay, so your neurons are going to be building for Could be a month or two. And I don't recommend showing up for hours and hours the first time you write if it's been a long time. That will cause burnout. All right. So when you're creating habits or when you've fallen off the wagon, which we all do, here's my recommendations for you. Our emotions create our habits. Remember how I talked about how the amygdala is the emotion brain, right? Your brain wants to feel good. Your brain wants to go toward pleasure. And so the best way to hack this is to make writing feel pleasurable. And you might be wondering, like, how the hell do I do that? I have a hack for you from this book, which is fantastic. I just love his name, like BJ Fogg. Like, that's just such a name. Like, oh, such a vibe. He recommends celebration. He calls this shine, which I really love. And celebration is what he says is making or breaking our habits. And I want to make it clear that celebrations are not rewards. So like a reward could be like, I get to go out for dinner tonight if I write my book, or like after a hard week of writing, I get to like do this thing. That's not a celebration. We'll talk about what it is. So it might seem embarrassing to a lot of people to celebrate a small habit, but celebration wires in the habit faster because of the emotion it gives you. When you think about how your brain wants to feel pleasure, if you celebrate something and you feel good about what you did, that tells your amygdala, hey, we want to repeat this because we feel good right now. It gives us a feeling of success. Okay. So when your amygdala and your brain notice pleasure, it's like, ooh, I'm going to do that again. This feels good. This is a vibe. When you think about celebrating, you do it immediately or right after the new habit. So you show up to write, you do 30 seconds or 1 minute, and then you like fist pump or you like clap for yourself. I clap for myself. I'll give you a few other ideas in a minute, but you celebrate. Okay. Celebration equals pleasure equals happy brain, happy amygdala. Okay. Positive reinforcements is what builds our habits. So most of us probably know it doesn't feel very good to be berated or shamed. And so creating a positive feeling in your writing by celebrating yourself is so helpful here. All right. So here are some celebration ideas. So physically say, yes, I did it. You could pump your fists in the air, put your palms together in gratitude, clap your hands, do a happy dance, whistle a song. You could imagine a crowd cheering for you. That's a really cute one. You could drum a happy beat on your desk, smile widely. These might seem embarrassing, but they will tell your brain that you like this behavior, and your amygdala will be like, I'm going to do this again. Tell me what you want to do for celebration. Tell me in the chat. What's your celebration? Mine is that I clap for myself. When I go to the gym, I will literally clap for myself. I don't care what anybody thinks. If I go out to a cafe and I'm writing, I will clap for myself right there. I don't care. A clapping soundtrack and play it after. That's cute. I love that one. I just smile. I like that. Smiling. Make sure you smile wide, though. Make sure your brain knows it's a celebration. You could probably find a cheering crowd video to play. Yes, I think that's one person I know, like, create a song for himself to sing to himself when he wrote, which I love. Okay, we're going to wrap up. Just show up and take the amygdala's knife. All right. So when you're first building habits, just tell yourself 5 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. All right. This quiets resistance because it feels accessible. Okay. You can also name your emotion, witness what your brain is telling you, and choose new thoughts. Remember, our thoughts can create our conditions when we show up. Right. And be aware of the brain's negativity bias and confirmation bias. Okay. Do the bare minimum and celebrate it. Celebration matters. Okay. This is what your brain's going to feel like as you build neurons and as you use elbow grease. Your brain's going to be like, yay, I'm doing hard things. And for my perfectionist, my last thing to say is surrender to messy art. I know it has nothing to do with brain science, but surrender to messy art. Your process is where your magic lives. Okay. And I have a link. If you want, I have like three separate guides that are companions to this talk. And you can grab them for free by going to this link here, monicacoaching.com/dabble. And that has some really fun resources. So one of them is my favorite craft books and resources that I spent like 10 years choosing. Another one is a guide to your body. So the PSNS and SNS responses and how to manage them. And then another one is actually how to manage your emotions and your thoughts. Okay, so if you want to look at those and get some ideas on how to manage those things, you can check that out. And here's just information about me if you're curious about getting in my world. Okay, how are you guys feeling? I know I just threw a lot at you. You're still muted, Abby.
Ding dong dang. We can ask everybody to put their questions in the chat, but I know there's like a 10 or 15 second sort of like weird lag on the chat sometimes. I should have warned you about that earlier.
You're good.
You did great, like waiting patiently for everyone to catch up with us. I starred 2 comments really early on. One of them, I know you did answer, but I think it's kind of worth maybe mentioning again. Does that mean things like PTSD and generalized anxiety may make being a writer harder?
I struggle to say that it will make it harder, but I think I don't want to tell people that like their dreams are impossible. It's more that it makes it so it'll take more work to manage the brain's responses. And this is totally possible work. You can totally do this stuff, but it will take a bit more elbow grease to do it. So I have some anxiety disorders. I have an anxiety disorder, and I do have to work a little bit more with my brain when I show up than some of my friends who don't have anxiety, if that makes sense. And that's just the case for any type of person. Like if you have depression or whatever it might look like in your brain, that means that those thoughts are going to be based on those struggles. And we can work with them, but it takes a little bit more elbow grease. And that's one of the reasons I mentioned it can take my brain like 15 minutes for my amygdala to calm down. Does that make sense to you guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so Journey asks, does writing scenes that are frightening, such as bad things happening to your characters, affect you differently from writing calm scenes?
This is a good question. Technically, so they've done like brain imaging, right? Like I've read different books about brain imaging, and if you're imagining things, sometimes your brain can think of it as actually happening. So technically, doing something by writing with imagining it can affect your brain. I think I feel like I've heard this quote, like you're either the type of writer that laughs when you hurt your characters, or you're the type that cries when you hurt your characters. And I kind of feel like this has to do with that as well. You're just like, oh, like I'm hurting my characters and I'm putting them in pain and like bad things are happening. But I think a lot of writers, it's funny, I've never actually been asked this, but when I think about brain imaging and like how if you close your eyes and you imagine yourself running, right? Like sometimes you can measure that like your heart rate goes up, right? It's not necessarily bad that this happens. It just is what it is. Does that make sense, Journey?
Have you ever read Wired for Story by Lisa Cron? Where, one of the things she talks about is your brain doesn't know the difference between reading and actually living. So I wondered if anybody had ever made the connection between writing and
maybe that's why I like cozy stories that like don't stress me out.
Same. I have to laugh because Doug writes horror. And I'm always like, why? Why would you do that to yourself? And he's like, I don't know. It makes me feel safe because I know it's not happening to me. And then I
Fair.
feel better about the positive things that I see in life because I realize all the awful, horrible things that could be happening. And they're not. And so I kind of laugh. I'm like, oh no, I'm just too much of a weenie for that. So
That is so funny.
anyway, I'm kind of scrolling through here. B, we'll put the link that Monica has here. We'll put them in the community too. We'll share them there afterwards. That way you guys can just click and see
I don't
them.
feel like I can actually put a link. It says I have to join the chat, which I never bothered. I just keep looking at it.
And half the time when I try and share a link, I end up like it blocks me somehow. So I've kind of just like quit even trying. But Susan says, I experience secondhand embarrassment for fictional characters.
You know, when you're like watching a show and you have to pause it because you're embarrassed or like stressed for someone and you're just like, oh my God. But like, yeah, it is what it is.
I love it. All right. Well, I don't see any questions. I have a feeling this is one of those presentations that you kind of have to sit with for a few and be uncomfortable with before you figure out how to like incorporate it into your life. And so anyway, maybe we can bring this conversation into the community, you guys. So after you kind of sit with it for a little while, we can keep talking about it and send people over to the replay as well. So thank you everybody in the chat for joining us today. Thank you, Monica. I'm going to hit end on the stream, but you hang tight. And we'll just say goodbye to everybody here. I think there is a writing, might have a few minutes left of a writing sprint. If you guys are looking for something to do, I think Hank is doing a writing sprint right now. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next